My granddaughter was the only one in that whole damn family who looked me in the eye and told me she believed me. 8 years old, pigtails, missing her 2 front teeth. She climbed up on the porch swing next to me the day after the verdict and said, "Grandpa, Mommy's wrong about you." Then she handed me a drawing of a house with a chimney and 2 stick figures holding hands in the front yard, and she said, "This is where you and me are gonna live." That was 12 years ago. I'm telling you about it now because last Thursday my ex-wife called me from a hospital in Naples, Florida, and asked if she could come stay with me in the mountains. And before I get to that call, you need to know how I got here. Where are you watching from tonight? Drop it in the comments. I read everyone. I'm sitting on a back porch in Asheville, North Carolina. The sun's going down behind the Blue Ridge, and I've got a glass of bourbon and a story I never thought I'd tell out loud. My name doesn't matter much, but for the sake of this, call me Hollis. I'm 67 years old. I spent 34 years as a structural engineer in Cincinnati, Ohio. I built bridges, I built parking garages, I built one hospital wing in Indianapolis that, last I checked, was still standing just fine. I worked for a mid-sized firm, never made partner, never wanted to. I made enough to buy a 4-bedroom colonial in a nice neighborhood, send 2 kids to state schools, and put a little aside every month into a 401k that, by the time everything fell apart, was sitting at just over $400,000. Not Wall Street money, but honest money, earned over decades money. My wife at the time, the mother of my children, was a woman I'll call my ex. Just my ex. She doesn't get the dignity of a name in this story, and you'll understand why in a minute. We met in 1983 at a wedding in Dayton. She was a bridesmaid. I was a groomsman. She had this laugh that filled up a room, and when she looked at me across the reception hall, I felt like somebody had finally seen me. We were married 14 months later. Our son came along in '86, our daughter in '89. For about the first 15 years, things were good. Or at least I thought they were. She taught 4th grade for a while, then quit when our daughter was born. She ran the house. She ran the kids' schedules. She ran the social calendar. I went to work. I came home. I coached our son's Little League team. I taught our daughter how to ride a bike in the cul-de-sac. We took a family vacation to Myrtle Beach every summer for 11 straight years, but somewhere around 2003, 2004, something changed in her, or maybe it had always been there and I just hadn't noticed. She started taking these long phone calls in the laundry room with the door shut. She started going to book club 3 nights a week. She started looking at me across the dinner table like I was a piece of furniture that wasn't quite the right color anymore. I asked her once. I said, "Are you happy?" And she looked at me, and I'll never forget this. She said, "Hollis, you ask the most boring questions." I let it go. That was my mistake. 20 years of mistakes, really. I let it go and let it go and let it go. By the time our son was in high school, I was sleeping in the guest room more nights than not. She said I snored. I'd had a sleep study. I didn't snore, but I wasn't going to argue, because arguing meant being the bad guy, and I had spent my whole marriage trying not to be the bad guy. Our son grew up watching me get smaller and smaller in that house, and he learned a lesson from it that I didn't realize until much later. He learned that his father was someone you could push around. He learned that his mother was the one with the power. And by the time he was 22 and graduating from Ohio State, he had aligned himself with her completely. Not in any dramatic way, just in the small ways, whose opinions he asked for, whose phone calls he returned first, whose side of the story he believed without question. Our daughter was different. She was the youngest. She saw things. She came to me one night when she was 15, knocked on the door of the guest room where I was reading, and she said, "Dad, is something going on with Mom?" And I said, "What do you mean, sweetheart?" And she said, "She's lying about something." I can tell. I told her she was being silly. I told her her mother was just stressed. I lied to my own daughter to protect a marriage that was already a corpse. I'll regret that until the day I die. The end came in October of 2014. I just turned 56. I was working late on a bridge retrofit job in northern Kentucky, and I came home around 9 o'clock on a Tuesday, and there was a man's jacket on the chair in our front hallway. Not mine. A black North Face fleece, size large, that I'd never seen before in my life. I stood in the foyer holding my briefcase. I could hear the television upstairs. I walked into the kitchen. There were 2 wine glasses on the counter, both used, both with lipstick on them. One of them had her shade. The other one didn't. I went upstairs. The bedroom door was closed. I didn't knock. I opened it. She was sitting up in our bed, just her, in a robe I didn't recognize. The bathroom door was shut, and I could hear the shower running. She said, "Hollis, Hollis, just listen." I didn't say anything. I turned around. I went back downstairs. I sat at the kitchen table for about an hour in the dark, not crying, not angry, just empty. Then I got up, drove to a Hampton Inn off the interstate, and slept for 10 hours straight. The deepest sleep I'd had in a decade. The man in the shower turned out to be a real estate developer from Mason, Ohio. I'll call him the developer. He was 58, divorced twice, drove a Cadillac Escalade, and according to the lawyer my ex hired 3 days later, he was the love of her life. They'd been seeing each other for, depending on which version you believed, anywhere from 8 months to 4 years. My son sided with his mother, not in some dramatic confrontation, just in his silence. He didn't return my calls for 2 weeks. When he finally did, he said, "Dad, I just need some space to process all this." Process what exactly? I wanted to ask. Your father coming home to a stranger in his bedroom? But I didn't say that. I said I understood. My daughter, 25 at the time, came to my hotel room with a pizza and a bottle of wine and stayed for 3 hours and let me cry for the first time in 30 years. The divorce took 14 months. My ex got the house. I got the lake cabin in Hocking Hills that our parents had left us, which she didn't want anyway. We split the retirement accounts down the middle, which left me with about $210,000 and a lot of paperwork. I kept my pickup truck. She kept the SUV. We split the kids' college funds in a way that was supposed to be fair, but felt like getting kicked in the ribs. The day the decree came through, June of 2016, I sat in my truck in the parking lot of the Hamilton County Courthouse, and I made a decision. I wasn't going to stay in Cincinnati. I wasn't going to drive past the house she got to keep. I wasn't going to run into her at Kroger. I wasn't going to be the sad, divorced engineer eating dinner alone at Skyline Chili every Friday night. I called my daughter that afternoon. I said, "Sweetheart, I'm thinking about moving." And she said, "Dad, do whatever you need to do. I'll come visit you wherever you go." 3 weeks later, I drove down to Asheville, North Carolina for a long weekend. I'd been there once in the 80s on a fishing trip. I rented a cabin on the French Broad River. I sat on the porch in the morning with my coffee, and I watched the mist come up off the water, and I felt, for the first time since I'd been in my 20s, like I could breathe. I bought a small house on 3 acres outside of town, $89,000 cash, 2 bedrooms, a wood stove, a creek running through the back. I sold most of my furniture in Cincinnati. I drove down with my truck loaded up and a U-Haul behind it, and I crossed the state line into North Carolina on a Tuesday morning in September, and I didn't look back. My son didn't come to the housewarming. He sent a text message. "Hope you like it down there, Dad." My ex married the developer 5 months after the divorce was finalized. November of 2016, they had it at a country club in Mason, Ohio. Big affair. My son was the best man. I found out about the wedding the way you find out about anything these days. Facebook. My daughter sent me a screenshot. There they were, my son in a tuxedo, my ex in a cream-colored gown, the developer in a navy blue suit, all of them grinning like they'd won something. The caption underneath, written by my son, said this: It said, "So happy for Mom and her new husband. He's a successful, generous man who treats her like a queen the way she always deserved. The way she always deserved. The way she always deserved." I read that sentence about 100 times, sitting in my new little house in Asheville with the wood stove going and a bowl of chili I'd made myself getting cold on the kitchen counter. I read it 100 times. And then I closed the laptop and I went outside and I split firewood until my hands were shaking too hard to hold the axe. A successful, generous man. Not like your father, the engineer who paid the mortgage for 31 years. Not like your father, who came to every one of your baseball games. Not like your father, who is sitting alone in the mountains right now while your mother dances at her wedding to the man she was screwing in our bed. I didn't go to the wedding, obviously. I wasn't invited. But my daughter went. She told me she was going to go, and I told her good. I told her, "Sweetheart, you go and you be polite and you smile in the pictures, and then you come home and tell me everything." What she told me when she came back is what I want you to hear next. Because this is the part the algorithm probably wants me to tease. But I'm not going to. I'm going to tell you straight. The wedding had about 150 people. The developer's parents were both dead. His best man was his business partner, a guy named Reggie. During the toasts, after my son got up and made his speech about his mother finally finding the man who appreciated her, Reggie got up to give the best man toast for the developer. And Reggie was drunk. According to my daughter, he'd been drinking since lunch. He stood up with his glass, and he said, "I just want to congratulate my buddy here. I've watched him go through 2 divorces, and I've watched him chase this woman for the last 3 years. And I gotta say, brother, you finally got her." The room got very quiet, my daughter said. Reggie didn't notice. Reggie kept going. He said, "I remember when you first showed me her picture. What was that? 2012, 2013, you said, 'That's the one I'm going to marry someday.' And I said, 'Dude, she's already married.' And you said, 'Not for long.' 3 years. The wedding was in 2016. 3 years before that was 2013. My ex and I were still living in the same house in 2013. Our son was a sophomore at Ohio State. Our daughter had just started high school. My ex stood up from the head table. My daughter said, 'White as a sheet,' and walked out of the reception. The developer chased after her. The whole room was murmuring. My daughter said she sat there at her table watching it all happen, and she felt like she finally understood the whole shape of her childhood. Every weird late-night phone call, every business trip her mom took without her dad, every time her dad asked if everything was okay and her mom rolled her eyes. My son, my daughter told me, did not move. He just sat at the head table looking at his plate. He knew. He had to have known. Maybe not the details, but the shape of it. He knew his father had been lied to for years, and he had still chosen to stand up at that wedding and call the man who'd done it generous and successful. My daughter drove back to her apartment in Columbus that night and called me at 2 in the morning. She told me everything. I listened. I didn't say much. When she was done, I said, "Sweetheart, thank you for telling me. Now I want you to do me one favor. I want you to never bring this up to anybody in that family ever again. Not your brother, not your mother, not the developer. We know what we know. That's enough." She said, "Dad, don't you want to confront her?" I said, "No, sweetheart, I don't, and here's why. I had spent 33 years of my life trying to get that woman to see me, to respect me, to love me the way I loved her. And what I realized that night, listening to my daughter cry over the phone at 2 in the morning, was that you cannot make somebody see you who has already decided you're invisible. You can scream, you can demand, you can show them every receipt and every text message and every shred of evidence in the world. They will not see you. Because seeing you would mean admitting they were wrong, and some people would rather burn down their entire life than admit they were wrong. So I let it go. for 7 years, I let it go. I built a life in Asheville. I joined a woodworking club at the senior center. I started volunteering at the Habitat for Humanity build site on Saturdays, putting my engineering background to good use. I made friends, real friends. A retired plumber named Earl who fishes with me on Tuesdays, a widow named Janet who I have coffee with on Sunday mornings. Nothing romantic, just two old people who like each other's company. My daughter got married in 2019 to a good man, a high school history teacher in Columbus, and they had my granddaughter in 2020. That granddaughter, the one I told you about at the start, is now 12 years old. She's been coming to stay with me in Asheville for 2 weeks every summer since she was 4. She knows every trail in Pisgah National Forest. She knows how to start a campfire. She caught her first trout last summer, a rainbow, and she cried because we had to throw it back. She is the brightest light in my entire life. My son in those 7 years called me exactly 4 times. Christmas, my birthday twice the year he forgot until the next morning, and once when he needed help understanding his 401k options at the new job he'd taken in Columbus. He never apologized. He never asked how I was doing. He never came to visit. His mother, my ex, she remarried into what looked from the outside like a fairy tale. The developer had money, real money, several $1 million from a series of strip mall developments out in the Cincinnati exurbs. They moved into a 6,000 square foot house in Indian Hill. They took cruises. They went to Italy. My ex started posting photos on Facebook of herself in linen dresses on Italian balconies, captioned with things like, "Finally living my best life," and "Blessed beyond measure." I muted her on Facebook. Then I unfriended her. Then I quit Facebook altogether. Now we come to last Thursday. I was out on the back porch around 4 in the afternoon, working on a cherry wood jewelry box I was making for my granddaughter's birthday when my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number. I almost let it go to voicemail. But something made me pick up. It was my ex. I hadn't heard her voice in 8 years. Not once. Not even at my daughter's wedding, where she didn't show up because the developer didn't want to drive up to Columbus for the weekend. She said, "Hollis, it's me. I knew. I knew before she said the word who it was. There's something about a voice you've lived with for 33 years. You can't unknow it." I didn't say anything for a long moment. Then I said, "Why are you calling me?" She started crying. Not the polished, performative crying I remembered from arguments in our marriage. Real crying, old woman crying. The crying of someone who has finally run out of other people to call. She said, "He's gone, Hollis. He's gone." The developer had had a massive stroke 9 days earlier. He died in a hospital in Naples, Florida, where they had a winter house. He was 71 years old, but that wasn't the worst of it. The worst of it was what came next. The developer, it turned out, had been in significant financial trouble for the last 3 years. The strip mall money had dried up. He'd refinanced their house twice. He'd burned through most of his liquid assets trying to keep up the lifestyle, and about 18 months ago, he'd taken out a $2 million life insurance policy with my ex as the beneficiary. But 6 months ago, he'd quietly changed it. The new beneficiary was his daughter from his first marriage, a 38-year-old woman in San Diego that my ex had only met twice and didn't get along with. My ex, my daughter would later confirm by digging through some emails, had no idea about the change. She'd planned her entire widowhood around that $2 million. The Indian Hill house was already mortgaged to the hilt. Their cruise lifestyle had eaten through the savings. The Naples house was in the developer's name only, and his daughter's lawyer had already informed my ex she had 30 days to vacate. My ex was 65 years old with no income, no house, no husband, and a son who was somehow not picking up his phone. She said, "Hollis, I have nowhere to go." I sat there on my back porch in Asheville with my chisel in my hand, and I watched a hawk circle over the ridgeline, and I let her cry. She said, "I know I have no right. I know I have no right to ask you for anything," she said. but I have nowhere to go. Our son said his apartment in Columbus is too small. Our daughter said she'd have to talk to her husband. I don't have any friends left, Hollis. They were all his friends. I don't have anybody. She said, could I come stay with you? Just for a little while, just until I figure something out. And here is where I want you to understand something about me, about who I've become in these 7 years in the mountains. Because the man I was at 55 would have said yes. The man I was at 55 would have said, of course, come on down, we'll figure it out. The man I was at 55 had spent his whole life saying yes to that woman. The man I am at 67 said something different. I said, I'm sorry for your loss. I am. He was the father of my children's stepfather, and that means something, even now. I said, but the answer is no. She said, Hollis, please. I said, I want you to listen to me very carefully, because this is the only time we're going to have this conversation. I said, you slept with that man in our bed. You lied to me for at least 3 years and probably more. You took our son and you turned him against me, not in any one big moment, but in 1,000 small ones, and I lost my boy because of it, and I am never getting him back. You showed up to your wedding to that man 5 months after our divorce was final, and you let our son call him a successful, generous man who treated you the way you deserved, the way you deserved. I read those words 100 times, I told her. I read them until they were burned into me. She didn't say anything. She was just breathing on the line. I said, I built a life here, a small life, a good life. I have my daughter. I have my granddaughter. I have my granddaughter. I have my friends and my workshop and the woods. And what you are asking me to do is to open up the door of that life and let you walk into it because you have nowhere else to go. And I'm telling you, no, I am not your safety net. I was your safety net for 33 years, and you cut me loose. You don't get to grab the rope on the way down. She said, Hollis, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. And I said, I believe you. I do. I think for the first time in your life, you are actually sorry. But sorry doesn't undo it. Sorry doesn't give me back the years I spent sleeping in a guest room because you said I snored. Sorry doesn't give my daughter back her belief that her mother was a good person. Sorry doesn't give my son back the father he was taught to look down on. I said, you have a daughter in Columbus. Call her. Be kind to her. Apologize for not coming to her wedding. Apologize for 10,000 other things. And maybe, in time, she will find a way to help you. But she shouldn't have to, and I won't pressure her to. That has to be between the two of you. I said, as for me, I wish you peace, I do. I'm not angry anymore. I haven't been angry in a long time. But peace doesn't mean opening my door. Peace means closing it gently and walking away. And I hung up. I sat on that porch for another hour. The hawk was gone. The sun was coming down red over the ridge. I called my daughter and told her the whole conversation, word for word, so she'd know what was coming. She cried a little. She said, Dad, did I do the right thing? Did I do the right thing? All those years just being your kid and not getting in the middle? I said, sweetheart, you did everything right. You were the only one who ever did. My son called me 3 days later, first time in 9 months. He said, Dad, did Mom call you? And I said, yes, she did. He said, what did you tell her? And I said, I told her no. There was a long silence on the line. And then he said very quietly, yeah, I told her no chew. I almost laughed. I almost cried. I almost said something cruel about him finally figuring out what kind of woman his mother was. But I didn't, because somewhere underneath all of that anger I'd carried for so long, I just felt sorry for him. He was 38 years old. He had spent his entire adult life believing his mother's version of his father, and now he was going to have to figure out on his own, in his own time, who he actually was without that story. I said, "Son, if you ever want to come down to Asheville and split some firewood with me, the door is open." He said, "Maybe this fall, Dad. We'll see." I'm not holding my breath. But the door is open, and that's what matters. My ex, last I heard from my daughter, is renting a small condo in Mason, Ohio, near a Walmart. She got a part-time job at the front desk of a chiropractor's office. The Indian Hill house was sold to cover the debts. The developer's daughter got the $2 million. My ex got, in the end, almost exactly what I got. A small life, a modest life, a second chance at being a person instead of a performance. I hope she takes it. I really do. So that's where I am tonight, 67 years old, sitting on a porch in Asheville. Bourbon's almost gone. Sun's down. Cicadas are starting up. I want to tell you what I learned, because if you're watching this, you're probably somewhere in the middle of the story like mine. Maybe you're the one being pushed around. Maybe you're the kid who picked the wrong side. Maybe you're the one who's been sleeping in a guest room for 10 years telling yourself it's fine. Here's what I learned. The people who treat you like you're invisible will always come back the moment they need a witness to their suffering. That's not love coming back. That's not regret. That's not redemption. That's an empty bucket looking for a well. You are allowed to be the well that says no. You are allowed to walk away with your hands clean and your head up and your heart, what's left of it, intact. You are allowed to build a small life that nobody envies and nobody photographs and nobody puts on Facebook, and you are allowed to love that life more than you ever loved the big one that was killing you. My granddaughter is coming up next weekend. We're going to build a birdhouse together. The cherry wood jewelry box is almost done. I'm going to sand it tomorrow and put the first coat of finish on it Saturday morning. That's enough. That, friends, is more than enough. Thanks for sitting with me tonight. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me your story if you've got one. I'll read every single comment, and if any of this hit home for you, share it with somebody who needs to hear it. There's a lot of us out here who spend too many years being small for somebody else. It's not too late to come home to yourself. Good night from the Blue Ridge. I think about that phone call from my ex a lot. Not because I miss her. I don't. I think about it because of what it taught me about cause and effect. The slow kind, the kind that takes 30 years to come due. Every choice she made in our marriage was a small one. A long phone call in the laundry room, a book club that wasn't a book club, a roll of the eyes when I asked if she was happy. None of those things by themselves looked like the thing that ends a life. But they were. They were the bricks she was pulling out of the foundation, one at a time, while I was upstairs sleeping in the guest room thinking we were just going through a rough patch. By the time the developer was in my bed, the house was already gone. I just hadn't noticed yet. And here's the thing nobody tells you about cause and effect. It works on the good side, too. Every Saturday morning, I dragged myself out to the habitat build site when I'd rather have stayed in bed. Every 2 weeks, I drove up to Columbus to see my granddaughter when my back was killing me. Every Sunday, coffee with Janet. Every Tuesday, fishing trip with Earl. Those were bricks, too. I was rebuilding a foundation, one small, honest decision at a time. And when my ex called me last Thursday with nowhere to go, the reason I could say no was that I had spent 7 years building somewhere to stand. That's what nobody understood about my refusal. It wasn't cruelty. It wasn't revenge. It was just the math finally catching up to her. She had spent 30 years teaching our son that I was the kind of man you could push around, and then she was shocked when she called him for help, and his apartment was suddenly too small. She had taught him exactly what she got back. I want to leave you with this. There are 3 things I believe in at 67 that that I didn't believe in at 55. The first is that being decent isn't weakness. I let people walk on me for 30 years because I thought decency meant never pushing back. It doesn't. Decency means knowing when to open a door and when to close it, and having the spine to do both. The second is that wisdom is just paying attention. My daughter knew at 15 what I refused to see at 50. She paid attention. I didn't. Pay attention to the small things in your life, the phone calls behind closed doors, the eye rolls, the sleeping arrangements. They are telling you the truth. The third is that endurance is quieter than people think. I didn't endure by gritting my teeth. I endured by gritting in my teeth. I endured by getting in my truck and driving to a place where I could breathe. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is leave. Build a small life. Build it honest. And when the people who threw you away come knocking, you'll already know who you are.